Привет всем, с вами я, Janie, и это College Russian. In today's video, we are going to talk about, in my opinion, one of the most difficult aspects of Russian grammar. It's not the cases. I have bad news for you. Things are about to get a little bit more complicated as far as things go with verbs, but you've already got verb conjugations down thanks to this video here. And in today's video, I'm going to teach you about aspect. It's actually quite complicated, but the good news is in today's video, I will help make sense of everything and give you strategies for memorizing how to use the two different aspects. So let's get started. This is going to be a sample lesson. I have the accompanying materials available over on collegerussian.com. I highly recommend downloading that worksheet, and you can do it along with the video. And it also has practice exercises for you that you can do after you've finished watching the video, and ways that you can help memorize these aspectual pairs. So let's go ahead and get started with the lesson. So first of all, Russian has this concept called verbal aspect, по-русски глагольный вид. We don't have it exactly in English. Our verb tenses don't line up exactly, but it's what makes these two sentences mean totally different things. So one of them is «Что ты делал вчера» has one meaning versus «Что ты сделал вчера». Native speakers, you can leave your comments down below and let us know, what do those two questions mean to you? How are they different for you? Again, a native speaker is going to hear these two questions and know that they mean totally different things. Google, on the other hand, was not so reliable. As you can see, Google struggled with that. It translated both those sentences the same. But any native speaker can tell you those two questions have totally different meanings. Similar to that is in English. We kind of have this in English as well. So as an English speaker, somebody might say, have you read Harry Potter versus did you read Harry Potter? And I'm not talking about the difference between British English and American English. These have two totally different feelings to them, right? So if somebody comes up to you and says, have you ever read Harry Potter? I'm like, no, I haven't. I want to, but I haven't. Versus if they came up to you and said, did you read Harry Potter? You're going to go, oh, was I supposed to? Right? So they're in the same way that these two sentences are different in English, those other two sentences have a different feeling in Russian as well. So, and sure enough, look at what Google Translate. Google Translate translated both those sentences from English to the same thing in Russian, because Google Translate doesn't know what it's doing. All right. So this is where you need to learn verbal aspect so you can express things the way you want to express them. But good news is, just like in English, if somebody tells you, I am studying English, that wasn't grammatically correct, but we still know what you're trying to say. They're trying to say, I am studying English, right? So same thing with Russian. If you make mistakes in aspect, the average person is still going to understand you, but it's not necessarily grammatically correct. So most people, if you are now learning, and if you're learning about verbal aspect, my students at the university, as well as many of my private students right now, they're starting to realize that I'm correcting their speech all the time when they say things, and it's because they're using the wrong aspect in their verbs. So now that you're up to about the novice high level, maybe A2 level, it's time to start learning about verbal aspect and correct your mistakes that you're making when using verbs. So good news is, compared to English, our verb tenses in English, or look at this for Spanish or any of the Latin languages, Russian's actually pretty simple, because here, look at this chart for Spanish versus this chart for Russian. Whew, right? It's pretty simple. And so all you're doing is you're memorizing these two verb forms. And then if you watch this video about hacking into verb conjugations, once you get those conjugations down, this really shouldn't be intimidating, because it's just a matter of memorizing the partnership. What is the partnership? And then putting into practice those verb conjugation strategies that we've already talked about and that I've been drilling with all of my students. So here are some ideas, and this is going to be a 3-part series on verbal aspect. So what you're going to start by doing is start memorizing the partners. And again, if you go over and download that worksheet, I have a whole list of a lot of the verbs you've learned up until this point in your Russian. And there's a column for the imperfective and there's a column for the perfective. So I highly recommend going over there and getting that worksheet. Then the big thing here is learning key words. Key words are going to be your cheat sheet. If you see certain words in the sentence, is going to be either imperfective or perfective. And so in this video, I'll be teaching you what those keywords are, and I highly recommend taking notes. And all of that is over in the worksheet. It's very beautifully, deliciously laid out for you in a handy little chart. Again, I highly recommend going over there and downloading that worksheet. And then also on the next video, we're going to learn how to create verb charts, kind of like the one I just showed you. And then we will be doing a lot of practice using the imperfective versus the perfective in aspect. Okay. So just for today's video, I don't want to overwhelm you too much because I've already burst your bubble and you've lost your innocence as far as Russian verbs go. Things are about to get more complicated. So we're just going to focus on these 5 verbs in today's video. Делать versus сделать. Смотреть versus посмотреть. Говорить versus сказать. Читать versus прочитать. Покупать versus купить. Again, if you were to put all of these words into Google Translate, they're only going to come up with one translation, but we know that they mean something different based on how you use them. Okay. So again, by the end of today's video, you will know which of these verbs you need and in which context. So let's first talk about несовершенный вид. One, because this is pretty much the default aspect. And this is most likely, most of the verbs that you have been learning up to this point in your Russian studies have most likely been несовершенные verbs. And in Russian, we're saying imperfective, but the word совершенный in Russian means complete. So I think a better translation of this should have been the incomplete aspect. And you'll understand that here in a minute, because when we use this verb in несовершенный, it's either something that gets repeated, it was ongoing, it is ongoing, or we don't really care that it got completed. In Russian, the perfective is used when something was or will be completed. The imperfective is used everywhere else. So let's talk about keywords you're going to see when we're talking about the concept of something being repeated or habitual. Up until now in your Russian, you've been learning a lot of frequency words to indicate how often you do something. We've maybe talked about daily routines. And so anything that gets repeated is going to need несовершенный вид, imperfective, the incomplete verbal aspect. So here are some key words. Take some crazy notes right now, because these are the kinds of things you're looking for when you're reading a sentence. Anything with каждый, каждое утро, каждый день, каждую субботу, каждый год. Anything, because that implies repetition every day, every Saturday, etc. Words like всегда, иногда, никогда. Remember, никогда, you habitually don't do something. You have a habit of not doing it. That's also a habit, even if you don't do it. Anything that talks about how often you do something. Два раза в месяц, for example. So those are some key words. Again, those are all laid out in the worksheet that's over on collegerussian.com. It's very nicely organized in a pretty little table. So let's take an example sentence that students often want to try and be able to say. So they look at a sentence like this. We're choosing between говорить, which is the imperfective, which you've learned, right? Everybody knows this verb. And then you've also maybe learned сказать. What you didn't realize is they're actually 2 sides of the same coin. These are the same verb. Сказать is the perfective, the complete version, and говорить is the imperfective. So сказать often translates into English as to say, right? So students will see this. They want to tell me, oh, you know, my parents never say I love you. And they might say something like this. Мои родители никогда не скажут я люблю тебя. Because they think сказать means to say. And so, okay, great. I'm just going to say it like this. But guess what? This sentence actually means my parents never will. They will never say I love you. I don't know why, they have some problem, but they're never going to say it. No matter how hard I try, they will never say it. It doesn't mean that they currently never say it. Okay. And we'll talk about more why that's the case. So guess what? Говорить is our imperfective. It's the verb we need for when something is repeated. It's a habit. So the correct version of this sentence should have actually been мои родители никогда не говорят я люблю тебя. Говорить can mean to speak, like to speak a language, but it can also mean to say in a habitual, repeated way. Они никогда не говорят я люблю тебя. Okay, so another part of несовершенный вид is process. Again, because this is incomplete. We don't care whether this thing got completed or not. So anything that implies that this was an ongoing action or it got dragged out for a long period of time, it was prolonged. So some keywords that would show that are words like долго, for a long time. Еще, still, they're still doing something. Весь день, all day. Всю ночь, all night. Всю жизнь, my whole life. Any phrase that talks about how long you have been doing something. Notice there's no preposition. You just go straight into 5 лет. 5 лет. You have been doing something for 5 years. Okay, big thing here. The only imperfective has a present tense. Okay, the second you put something into perfective, there is no present tense, because guess what? We only care that it will get completed or it got completed. So there is no present tense in perfective. So if you want to express something in present tense, you have to use несовершенный, imperfective. And along those same lines, if in English we have a verb ending in ing, несовершенный, imperfective, is going to be the equivalent in Russian. So for example, if you love to swim, я люблю плавать, you're going to, actually that's not a good example because that's a verb of motion. Я люблю петь, for example. Петь is imperfective because you love singing. You love the process of singing. You don't just love getting it done, right? We'll talk more about that in just a second. So notice the verb chart. We're going to be creating these in the next video. But notice over here we have делать. It has a future version. Я буду делать. Ты будешь. It has a present version. Я делаю. And it has a past tense. Я делал. Now you come over here to the perfective version of it. Ooh, no present tense. There's no present tense. You either will do it or you did it. That's all we care about with perfective. Okay, so let's see then, considering there's no present tense with perfective, let's look at this example mini dialogue and see where this person went wrong. So imagine you say, «Привет, что ты делаешь?» Я сейчас посмотрю фильм. Right? You didn't say what you think you said. You just told that person who asked, what are you doing right now? You told them, I'm going to watch a movie. And they're going to be like, but okay, that's great. But what are you doing right now? You see what I'm saying? So you should have said, я сейчас смотрю. Я смотрю фильм. I am watching. ING gets imperfective. Okay. Also, as I was mentioning before, with verbs that imply that you repeat this action, right? So something like любить. It's not like you love to sing once and get it done. No, you love the process of singing. Я люблю петь. Уметь. Я умею готовить. I know how to. I know how to cook. It's not that I just know how to get the cooking done. I mean, that may be a thing, but that's not what we're saying. And then big one here, big one, with the word быть to express future. Я буду. If you say budu, you have to say an imperfective verb. Have to. So that explains why, that explains why there's another example sentence is Я буду купить. Nope. Купить is perfective. Okay. So you would need to say Я буду покупать. That's very counterintuitive because most likely you've already learned the verb купить, but you probably didn't realize that it's just a one-time thing versus покупать, which has that по on there. It's all very flipped and very confusing in Russian. So, я буду покупать. We'll practice that a lot more in the coming videos as well. Okay, big thing here. So now we're getting into perfective. I like to think of this aspect as the nagging case. You didn't get it done. You either need to get it, either you're going to do it or you did it. Somebody's nagging you and you want to get them off your back and you're like, dude, I did it. Or dude, I'll get it done. Right? So this is perfective when you want to emphasize that something was or will get done. So, for example, somebody's nagging you here. Ты сделал домашнее задание? Did you do your homework? Did you finish it? You're in big trouble. Did you do it? And he's like, his mom's nagging him, for example. He's like, нет, но завтра сделаю. Right? So you could be like, no, but I swear I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it. I'll get it done. Okay? So do you remember at the beginning of the presentation, we said, ты читал Гарри Поттера? Have you ever read Harry Potter? Versus did you read Harry Potter? And when we hear somebody say, did you read Harry Potter? We're like, oh, was I supposed to? Right? So that's the same concept with perfective. There is an expectation or an existing context. So if somebody says to you, ты прочитала Гарри Поттера, they're assuming you should have finished reading it, right? It was maybe assigned or something, or you told them you would, right? So that's where perfective gets used, when there's an expectation that it was supposed to get done. Again, think of nagging. Somebody's nagging you, right? Another big one with perfective is a one-time action, right? It's like we're not emphasizing that it just happened once and that's it, not a big deal, didn't get repeated necessarily. But like, for example, here's a context. Он сказал, я люблю тебя, не знаю, что делать, я не люблю его. Like, so he said, oh my gosh, he just said, I'm not saying that he always used to say, he said, I love you, and I don't know what to do because I don't love him. You see what I'm saying? So it's just a one-time action. Next, this is a big one, a series of actions, because most likely you had to have finished the one action before you could start the next, because very rarely are you simultaneously getting out of bed and eating breakfast and reading a newspaper all at the same time. Most likely you got out of bed, you ate breakfast, etc. Right? So a series of actions. For example, я посмотрел видео в College Russian, прочитал инструкции к материалу и сделал домашнее задание. So you watched the video on YouTube, then you read the instructions on the worksheet that you went over to the website and downloaded, and then you did it. Bam, 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 done. Every aspect of it was done. Okay? So again, you're emphasizing things got done before you started the next action. And keywords, not always, but often these keywords will go with perfective. So быстро. Я быстро прочитал статью и пошел на работу, for example. Уже, you already did something, and so, yeah, I already did that. I don't need to do it again, for example. Скоро, this will come in handy when you express the future. Да? So if somebody asks you, did you do it? And like, no, I'll do it soon. Я скоро сделаю. Хорошо, я скоро. I'm going to do that soon. Сразу, this means like straight away, right? Как только я получила email, я сразу ответила. So as soon as I got the email, I answered right away. I got it done. Yeah. Next one. Наконец-то, finally, at last. Я наконец-то прочитала «Войну и мир». Finally, I read War and Peace. Долго читала и наконец-то прочитала, right? If you were to put that sentence into Google Translate, it would be like, I read, and finally I read. But if you understand verbal aspects, you would know that it means I was reading War and Peace for a long time, and наконец-то прочитала, and finally I finished reading it. Yeah. And then lastly is if you have za plus a period of time. So we use za when we want to emphasize how quickly something was done. And we'll get to a practice on that. Okay, so if you're using the worksheet, you know on the worksheet, I want you to come up with a context that you could use these specific verbs in context. Okay, so I've provided you with the verb делать. You need to look over at the chart and determine, is it an imperfective or is it a perfective? If it's an imperfective, then we need to come up with a context that implies that it's repeated, for example, or it's present tense, or that shows some of those key concepts that I've talked about. So for example, что ты делаешь? This is present tense. We're not asking the person, what are you going to get done? Or what did you get done? We're asking them, what are you doing right now? ing means we need несовершенный вид. Okay, next one we have a keyword underlined. Я всегда делаю домашние задания. Да? So something like, I repeat this action. And again, maybe you get it done, but that's not what we're emphasizing. So our default is the imperfective. Third, что ты любишь делать? Что ты любишь делать? What do you like to do? And you repeat that action, therefore needing несовершенный вид. Что ты любишь делать? Okay, now on your worksheet is the word сказать. Okay. So let's look over at the chart to determine, is it imperfective or perfective? Okay, so we see it there in the perfective column, which means it was something that happened or will happen. It's not something that goes on for a long period of time. It's not something that gets repeated. So here are some example sentences that you could use. Что ты сказала? What did you say just right now this one time? What did you just say? You said it, and I didn't quite hear you. It's just this one time. Doesn't matter that you maybe say it all the time. All I want to know is, what did you say? Что ты сказала? Okay? Next one. Я скажу тебе завтра. Я скажу тебе завтра. What are they saying right here? Remember, there is no present tense in perfective. So if you see a perfective verb get conjugated, it bounces to the future. You cannot have a conjugated perfective verb that gets translated as a present tense thing. Nope. It automatically makes it future. And we will talk more about this in part 3 of this series. So with that in mind, number 2 means I will tell you tomorrow. I will tell you tomorrow. Вот. Номер 3. Он прочитал смс-ку и сказал, ой, мне пора. Right? So he got a text message on his phone. He read it, and then he said, oh, crap, I gotta go. Okay? Series of actions. He finished reading the text message, and then he said, one-time action, I gotta go. Series of actions. Okay? Следующий. Покупать. This one is so counterintuitive because usually in Russian, when you see the prefix po, it means perfective, but this one actually is reversed. And we will talk more about these tendencies in part 2 of this video. So, for example, you might say something like Я никогда не покупаю вино. Я не люблю вино. So I habitually do not buy wine because I don't like wine. Okay, so again, repeated. Keyword is никогда не. Then this one. Мы не будем покупать ничего в этом магазине. We will not be buying anything in that magazine. Because remember, if you have будем, будешь, 100%, you have to pair it with imperfective. You cannot say мы не будем купить. You cannot say мы будем посмотреть. You cannot say it. Okay? Good. So those are some examples there. Here's another one. Посмотреть. Right, so let's imagine this dialogue. For example, your friend's telling you, ты знаешь, есть очень интересное видео о русской грамматике на ТикТоке. And you want to be like, yeah, I already watched it. I know what you're talking about because I did it. I successfully watched it. So, вот это, да, я уже посмотрел вчера. Right? I already watched it. I got it done, and therefore, I already know what you're talking about. Okay, so again, the emphasis was that you've done it, you did it, not that you took a long time doing it or that you always do it. The emphasis is like, yep, I watched it. Okay, lastly, this verb, прочитать. Прочитать. So we look over at our case chart. Is this an imperfective version of to read, or is it the perfective version of to read? And we look up there and, oh, sure enough, it's perfective. So we got to think of how to use this exact verb in context. So for example, and remember, because it's perfective, it can only be past tense or future. Only past or future. It cannot be a present tense. I can't stress this enough. You cannot have present tense if you're using a perfective verb. You can't. So if you conjugate that verb, it turns into a future. Okay, so here we go. Ты прочитала Каренину? У нас сегодня экзамен. Okay, so you would not just walk up to somebody and be like, hey, what's up? Ты прочитала Каренину? Right? You would not just be like, hey, did you? No, because if you use a perfective, it implies the person was supposed to have done it. You have an expectation that they were going to get it done. So this sentence makes sense. We have an exam on Anna Karenina today. Did you finish reading it? We have an exam. I have an expectation that you were supposed to read it. And then look at this one. Я прочитала эту книгу за 3 дня. What is he emphasizing here? He is emphasizing that he finished reading it in just 3 days. In just 3 days. So that's where we would use the za plus a period of time is with perfective verbs. Okay, so that is all. Come back. I will have the part 2 of this video. And what we're going to do is I'm going to teach you how to memorize these partnerships. I like to have my students draw a whole verb chart where you kind of saw it at the beginning of this video. And then on the worksheet that I've provided you, I've given you a big fat list of a whole bunch of the verbs you should know at this point in your Russian speaking. And we're going to quiz you on how to guess which one is perfective, which one is imperfective. But don't be scared, because also in part 2 of this video, I'm going to give you strategies and tendencies that you can look for to decipher which one is perfective versus which one is imperfective. And then at the end of video, it will be moment of truth. How much have you learned? And I will quiz you on whether you know these aspectual partnerships. Хорошо, это все на сегодняшнее видео. I hope that was useful for you, and I hope you're not too scared to start using this verbal aspect. Again, Russians will still understand you if you make mistakes here, but it's always good to try and speak grammatically correct. Okay, хорошо, до свидания.